The hum of the airplane engines vibrated through the cabin, a steady drone that did little to drown out the sharp sting of humiliation. Aisha Thompson sat in her economy seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the tray table in front of her. She was a woman of grace, her dark skin glowing under the harsh overhead lights, her braided hair pulled into a neat bun. But tonight her heart felt heavy, bruised by the words she'd just overheard from the flight crew. It had started innocently enough. Aisha, a nurse who'd spent the last decade working grueling shifts in a Chicago hospital, was on her way to Atlanta for a rare weekend getaway with her husband, Marcus. She'd boarded the flight with a quiet excitement, her carry-on bag stuffed with a novel she hadn't had time to read and a small gift for Marcus, a watch she'd saved up for months to buy. But as she settled into her seat, she noticed the flight attendants whispering near the galley, their eyes darting toward her. "She doesn't look like she belongs in first class," one of them, a young woman with a tight blonde ponytail, had murmured, "Not quite soft enough. Probably got those tickets on some discount site." Her colleague, a man with a smug grin, chuckled. "Yeah, or maybe she's just lost. Economy's back there, sweetheart." Aisha's cheeks burned. She wasn't in first class. She and Marcus had booked economy seats to save money, but the assumption, the casual cruelty of their words, cut deep. She'd faced comments like this before, subtle jabs that questioned her place, her worth. But on this flight, surrounded by strangers, the sting felt sharper, more isolating. She glanced at the empty seat beside her, wishing Marcus would hurry back from the restroom. He always knew how to make her laugh, to remind her that the world's small-mindedness wasn't her burden to carry. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, and Aisha gripped the armrest, her wedding ring glinting under the cabin lights. She thought of Marcus, his warm smile, his steady presence. They'd met in college, two kids from working-class families who dreamed of making a difference. Aisha became a nurse, pouring her heart into saving lives. Marcus, a quiet man with a knack for numbers, had taken a different path, one that surprised even her. But tonight, all she wanted was his hand in hers, a shield against the world's sharp edges. The flight attendants' voices carried again, this time louder, as if they didn't care who heard. "I bet she's one of those types who complains about everything," the blonde said, rolling her eyes. "Probably expects free drinks or something." Aisha's throat tightened. She wanted to speak up, to tell them she'd spent her day saving a child's life in the ER, that she'd earned every inch of her place in the world. But the words wouldn't come. Shame, unearned but heavy, kept her silent. Then she heard Marcus's voice, calm but firm, from the aisle. "Excuse me, can I have a word?" Aisha looked up, her heart lifting. Marcus stood there, his broad shoulders filling the narrow aisle, his dark eyes steady but kind. He was unassuming in his jeans and sweater, his glasses slightly crooked from years of wear. The flight attendants turned, their smirks fading as they registered his presence. "Is there a problem?" the male attendant asked, his tone defensive. Marcus smiled, but there was steel in it. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about my wife," he said, his voice low but clear. "And I think you owe her an apology." The blonde attendant flushed, stammering. "We didn't mean anything by it, sir. Just joking around." "Joking," Marcus repeated, his gaze unwavering. "You mocked her for no reason other than your own assumptions." "That's not a joke. That's cruelty." The cabin grew quiet, passengers turning in their seats, sensing the tension. Aisha reached for Marcus's hand, but he gently squeezed her fingers and stayed focused on the crew. The male attendant crossed his arms. "Look, sir, we're just doing our jobs. No need to make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'm asking you to do better. My wife is a nurse who's spent years saving lives. She's on this flight to celebrate our anniversary, and instead of kindness, you've given her disrespect. So, let's try this again. Apologize." The blonde attendant's eyes darted to her colleague, then back to Marcus. We're sorry, she mumbled, barely audible. Marcus shook his head. Not to me. To her. The attendants turned to Aisha, their faces a mix of embarrassment and reluctance. We're sorry, ma'am, the blonde said, her voice tight. The man echoed her, his apology clipped. Aisha nodded, her voice soft but steady. Thank you. The crew retreated to the galley, their whispers now silenced. Marcus sat beside Aisha, taking her hand. You okay? He asked, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. She nodded, tears pricking her eyes. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said simply. You're my world, Aisha. Nobody gets to dim your light. The flight continued, the hum of the engines filling the silence. Aisha leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the weight of the moment lift. But the story wasn't over, not yet. Halfway through the flight, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a bit of a situation. One of our passengers in first class is having a medical emergency. If there's a doctor or nurse on board, please identify yourself to the crew. Aisha's heart raced. She squeezed Marcus's hand and stood, raising her hand. I'm a nurse. The flight attendants, the same ones who'd mocked her, froze, their eyes wide. Aisha didn't hesitate. She followed them to first class, where an elderly man was clutching his chest, his face pale. His wife sat beside him, her hands trembling as she whispered, "Please, help him." Aisha knelt beside the man, her training kicking in. She checked his pulse, asked about his symptoms, and recognized the signs of a possible heart attack. Do you have a medical kit? She asked the crew, her voice calm but commanding. The blonde attendant scrambled to retrieve it, handing it to Aisha with a look of awe. Aisha worked quickly, administering oxygen and aspirin, stabilizing the man as best she could until the plane could land. The man's wife gripped Aisha's hand, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. You're an angel. As Aisha returned to her seat, the cabin erupted in applause. Passengers murmured their thanks, their faces filled with gratitude. The flight attendants, now visibly humbled, approached her. Ma'am, the blonde said, her voice genuine this time. We had no idea. You're incredible. Aisha smiled, her heart full. I'm just doing my job, she said, echoing their earlier words, but with kindness instead of malice. But Marcus wasn't done. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, he stood, addressing the cabin. I want to say something, he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. My wife, Aisha, is the strongest, most selfless person I know. She saves lives every day, and tonight she saved one on this flight. But there's something else you should know. Aisha looked at him, confused. Marcus turned to her, his eyes shining with pride. Aisha thinks I'm just an accountant, but I've been working on something bigger. I didn't want to tell you until it was certain, but I've been leading a project to fund mobile clinics for underserved communities. We just secured a grant for 10 clinics, and they're going to be named after you, Aisha. The Aisha Thompson Health Initiative. Aisha's breath caught, tears spilling down her cheeks. The cabin burst into cheers, passengers clapping and whistling. The flight attendants, now fully chastened, joined in, their faces red with shame and admiration. Marcus, Aisha whispered, pulling him into a hug. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're the hero, he said, kissing her forehead. I just wanted to give you a stage to shine. As the plane touched down, the passengers disembarked, many stopping to thank Aisha and Marcus. The elderly man's wife hugged Aisha tightly, promising to keep in touch. The flight attendants, now quiet and reflective, offered a final apology, this time with sincerity. Aisha and Marcus stepped into the Atlanta airport, hand in hand, their hearts full. The world felt a little brighter, a little kinder. They'd faced cruelty and risen above it, not with anger, but with compassion and love. And in that moment, Aisha knew that no matter what the world threw at them, they'd always have each other and the power to make a difference, one act of kindness at a time.